Hi everyone, welcome to Buckle Up Podcast. I'm Natalia Earle and I'm a certified business and life coach that loves talking to people. I'm fascinated by humans and how our brain works. What is it that makes a decision good or bad, and how does that decision ultimately shape our path and destiny? Everyone loves to talk about success, but what about the flip side? How about adversity? Failure is such a big and often necessary part of life, and it's simply unavoidable. So I invite you to join me on this inspiring, honest, unpolished interview show with breathtakingly real conversations that go deep on setbacks and hardships that are part of the puzzle that ultimately lead to growth, discovery of inner greatness, and what makes us resilient. Grab your helmet and buckle up, people. It's going to be a bumpy ride. But what a ride it will be. Today's guest, Michael R. Davidson, was raised in the Midwest. Hitting President Kennedy's call for more young Americans to learn Russian, he studied the language, and military service took him to the White House, where he served as translator for the Moscow-Washington Hotline. His language abilities attracted the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency, and following his military service, Mr. Davidson spent the next 28 years as a Clandestine Services officer. 17 of those years were spent abroad in a variety of sensitive posts working against the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. In the private sector, he worked as a business owner and security and economic development consultant before devoting full-time to his writing. Mr. Davidson is called upon frequently to comment on current events. Davidson, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure, Natalia.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you choose your career? How did you end up where you are today?
That's actually a very long story, and since it's my story, I find it incredibly interesting. Actually, my career found me in a way, I suppose. I remember back, the first inkling of it came back around 1956. Okay. I was 12 years old, and the Hungarian Revolution had occurred. And I saw those black and white newsreels of Soviet tanks crushing the Hungarian Revolution. Well, that convinced me that communism was a pretty bad thing. And maybe there ought to be some people who do things about that. So I determined there and then, well, I ought to do something about that. And before I went to college, President Kennedy sent out his famous call, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And he said we did not have enough people in the United States who spoke Russian. So I studied Russian in college. And then when I joined the Army, I was fortunate enough to be sent to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, studied Russian there for 2 years, and then got a terribly rough job as the translator for the Moscow-Washington Hotline at the White House. So my last 2 years in the military, I spent in the White House in Washington. And then as Kismet would have it, the agency thought they needed more people who weren't actually Russians. They needed WASPs like me who spoke Russian. So they knocked at my door a few times and I answered, and the next 28 years I was in the Central Intelligence Agency. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's incredible. So how was learning Russian? It's not an easy language to learn.
Well, that's something that surprised me, because I had never studied a foreign language other than a smattering of Latin in high school. And I found it easy. I guess I've got that special fold somewhere in my brain that just allows me to learn foreign languages fairly easily, which is a prime requisite for being an intelligence officer, especially if you're going to be a street guy like I was. And so since then, I've learned several languages and still speak 3 or 4 of them fairly well. My Russian is still pretty strong, and it's just worked out. I happen to love languages. As a matter of fact, about 2 years ago, I translated a novel from Russian to English, a novel that had been written by a friend of mine who lives in California. Her name is Ksenia Kirilova. And and she and I actually before that, had written 2 novels together. She would write a few chapters in Russian, which I would translate to English. I would write a few chapters in English, and we'd go back and forth like that until we had the entire thing down in English, and we published them. So we did 2 of those, which was a lot of fun, although, as you can imagine, it's about a year-long project for each one of them.
Right. Right. Wow, that's incredible. Especially to translate something. I think it's so much more, difficult when it comes to, getting the message out right. And I've read all the Russian writers in English. I do read in Russian, but it's very hard for me. I read like a second grader. It takes me forever. So I always get fascinated that the culture and the message is being able to be delivered through the translation.
It's very, I won't say difficult, but it's a very, I say, maybe artistic endeavor to be sure you get the feelings and the really underlying subtext through when you translate something, especially a novel. It's quite important. Ksenia's novel, which is called In the Web of Madness, is almost, I'd say, Solzhenitsyn-like, in that it exposes the truths about the Soviet use of psychiatry, psychiatric hospitals, and psychotropic drugs against dissidents back in the bad old days of the Soviet Union. And I actually highly recommend that novel to people. I'm proud of having translated it, but I think it's a work which, especially today, given what's going on in the world, given that we have a generation which has forgotten or actually never knew what the Cold War days were like, it might be useful for them to see the logical consequences of totalitarianism.
Right.
There's a few years in Chile as well, so my Spanish is pretty well up to snuff, although with a Castilian accent these days.
So how many years did you spend in Russia?
I was never in Russia.
Okay, you were never physically in Russia.
No, and I don't dare go there now, but I was spent 3 years in Poland.
Okay.
And 2 years in West Berlin, in the middle of East Germany. Okay. So I had my Cold War tours.
Did you ever make it to Georgia by any chance?
No. Although I enjoyed their wine.
Yes, we do have great wine. So what was your favorite place that you visited throughout your career? The most enjoyable experience that you had?
Well, that depends on whether you are talking about a professional experience or a just personally, wanky, enjoyable experience. Poland, I would say, was my most satisfying professional experience. It was at the height of the Cold War, 1974 to 77, and we were handling some very, very important cases in there. If you read my books, eventually you'll see how we did that, and we were well trained to operate under surveillance, to have agent contacts while we had surveillance behind us. So it was pretty gut-churning, adrenaline-producing, exciting for those 3 years. And then several years in Spain, which I enjoyed as well. So it's difficult for me to choose between France and Spain as the most enjoyable place. I love both of the peoples. I love both of the languages, and I love the food, and especially in both countries, and the wine. So
Yes, definitely.
there
Yes.
you go.
So, what was the biggest adversity that you faced throughout your career?
Bureaucracy. Uh, I eventually left the CIA after when I reached retirement age because of the growing bureaucracy within our own government. I always said that I would keep doing that job until it was not fun anymore, and it ceased being fun because I found that the higher you go, because I was a senior in the senior intelligence service. Uh, the higher you go, the more difficult it becomes to do things. And I was always at heart a street guy. I wanted to get out and rub elbows with the enemy, so to speak, because I enjoyed that contact. I enjoyed recruiting people. I enjoyed running agents. It was a sweaty business, but still it was something that really gets into your blood after a while. That's not to say you think it's easy or you take it for granted. One of the rules we always had was if you're not nervous when you're on your way to an operational task, then it's time for you to get out of the business. So I never succumbed to thinking it was easy, but it was extremely satisfying, mainly because I detested the enemy. I had seen what the enemy did to the people it subjugated. And above all things, I wanted to get rid of that enemy. So you can imagine that I was quite happy when the Soviet Union fell, and when the Berlin Wall that I had crossed many, many times came tumbling down. That was a very satisfying moment for me. I thought we.
I don't know. I'm not a spring chicken anymore. But so, what's love to you?
What is love to me? Holy cow. I knew when I listened to your interview you did with Bob that you were going to ask questions like this. And you just like to throw people off balance is what you like to do. What is love to me? Well, love is devotion, I suppose. You make a promise when you get married. It's all for better or for worse. If you're lucky, it stays better. If you're not lucky, it can get worse. But that doesn't mean you abandon the project.
Yes, definitely. And what's wealth to you?
Wealth? Well, that's interesting. I mean, there's a simple definition of just having a lot of money, but I don't think that's really wealth. That's just having a lot of money and a lot of the ability to acquire a lot of material things. Wealth is actually probably just happiness, being satisfied with who you are and where you are. Of course, you want to have the wherewithal to have enough food, to have shelter, to have those things. But in my own instance, I'm far from wealthy, but I'm perfectly content. So perhaps wealth is contentment.
Yes. And if you were an animal, which one would you be?
Oh. I think I'd be a pug dog.
I love it. So what would be the one thing that people wouldn't guess about you?
Oh, that I'm a soft-hearted romantic, I guess.
Okay. I love it. Okay.